Welcome to Nightfall Horrors 002. Step into terrifying, true-style stories and subscribe now for more chilling tales. The summer of 2024 was supposed to be simple. I had just finished my third year of college and needed a quiet place to stay while earning extra money before returning to San Diego. Through a family friend, I got an opportunity that sounded almost too good to be true. A dairy farm in the hills of northern Pennsylvania. The owners were leaving the country for several months and needed someone to watch over the property. In exchange, I could live there rent-free. The farm sat in the middle of nearly 50 acres of open land. During the day, it looked beautiful. Rows of corn swayed in the wind. Chickens wandered between weathered barns. Old maple trees lined the edges of the property. But at night, everything changed. The tree lines surrounding the farm became solid walls of darkness. No street lights, no neighbors nearby, no sounds except insects, distant coyotes, and the occasional groan of old wooden beams settling inside the farmhouse. The house itself was enormous, much bigger than any farmhouse had a right to be. 3 floors, a ballroom-sized studio, a basement freezer packed with enough food to survive a small apocalypse. The owners joked that I might get lonely. They were wrong. Lonely was the one thing I never felt there. My second week on the property, strange things started happening. Nothing dramatic at first, just little details. The chickens would suddenly gather against one side of their enclosure every evening, staring toward the woods. The farm dog refused to go near the northern tree line after sunset. And every night around 10:30, the old intercom system connecting the house and barns would activate by itself. A burst of static, then silence, then static again. The first few times I assumed it was faulty wiring. An old farm, old electronics, simple explanation. Until one evening when I walked into the equipment barn to inspect the intercom unit. The speaker crackled. A voice came through. Not clearly, not enough to understand words, just a low whisper. A man's voice, slow, calm. Almost as if he knew I was standing there listening. I froze. The whisper continued for nearly 10 seconds before cutting out completely. I searched every building on the property. Nothing. No one. No vehicles. No footprints. That night, I locked every door in the farmhouse. Around midnight, while writing in the upstairs office, I noticed headlights moving slowly down the gravel road to the farm. A white vehicle. It stopped at the front gate. The engine remained running, but nobody got out. For nearly 15 minutes, the vehicle sat motionless in the darkness, waiting, watching, and somehow I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was inside already knew my name.
The white vehicle remained at the gate for nearly 20 minutes. I watched from the second floor window without moving. The headlights never switched off. The engine never stopped running. And whoever was inside never stepped out. Eventually, the vehicle reversed slowly down the gravel road and disappeared into the darkness. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe someone got lost. Maybe a hunter checking roads. Maybe a neighbor. But when I walked down to the gate, I found something that destroyed every reasonable explanation.
Footprints. Fresh footprints. They weren't near the road. They were inside the property. Whoever had been in that vehicle had entered through the gate at some point during the night. The prints led through the wet grass before disappearing near the northern tree line. The same tree line the dog refused to approach. The same place the chickens stared at every evening. I followed the trail for nearly 50 yards. Then the tracks stopped. Not faded, not turned around, stopped, as if the person had simply vanished. That afternoon, I drove into town for supplies. The local grocery store was small, crowded, and filled with people who clearly knew each other. The moment I mentioned the farm, several people exchanged uneasy glances. One older cashier stopped scanning my groceries. "You're staying there alone?" I nodded. She looked uncomfortable. "Has anyone come to the house yet?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" The woman hesitated. Then she shook her head. "Never mind." Before I could ask another question, she quickly changed the subject. The entire drive back, her reaction bothered me. It felt like everyone knew something they weren't willing to say. That evening, the air felt heavier than usual. The sky darkened early. A storm was building somewhere beyond the hills. Around 9 p.m., the farm dog suddenly started growling at the front door. Not barking, growling, low and deep, the kind of sound animals make when they sense danger. I looked through the glass. Nothing. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. The road beyond the gate was empty. Then 3 slow knocks echoed through the house. Knock, knock, knock. Not on the front door. The sound came from somewhere else, the side entrance near the kitchen. I grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the hallway. Another 3 knocks, closer this time. The dog backed away with its tail tucked between its legs. That scared me more than the knocking. The dog was fearless, yet now it looked terrified. I switched on the exterior floodlights. The yard exploded with light. Still, nobody. No movement, no shadows, nothing. Then, the intercom system crackled alive upstairs. Static, a burst of feedback. And this time, the voice was clearer, much clearer. A man's voice, barely above a whisper, but I understood every word. "Don't open the door." My blood turned cold. I ran upstairs toward the control panel. The speaker hissed once more. Then another voice joined the first, a woman's voice, soft, almost pleading. "He's already here." The entire system went dead. Silence filled the farmhouse. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, and from somewhere deep within the northern woods, I saw a single pale figure standing perfectly still between the trees, watching the house, watching me. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The figure stood motionless at the edge of the woods, barely visible between the trees. A flash of lightning illuminated the field. For the briefest moment, I saw it clearly. A person. At least, it looked like one. Tall, thin, wearing something gray. Then darkness swallowed it again. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in through the window. Nothing. The spot was empty. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I stayed awake until sunrise, checking the tree line every few minutes. The figure never returned, or at least not where I could see it. The following afternoon, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into the driveway. The deputy introduced himself as Officer Randall. Friendly guy, late 40s, local his entire life. When I mentioned the strange vehicle and the figure in the woods, he listened carefully. Then he asked a question that made my stomach tighten. "Did you hear voices?" I stared at him. "What?" "The intercom system." My silence answered for me. Randall looked away toward the barns. For a moment, he seemed to regret saying anything. Then he sighed. "You're not the first person who's reported that." A chill ran through me. "What exactly are you talking about?" The deputy hesitated. "The previous caretaker left after 3 weeks." I felt my heart sink. No one told me there was another caretaker. There wasn't supposed to be. He rubbed the back of his neck. The owners didn't want rumors spreading. Rumors about what? Randall looked toward the northern woods. The voices. Before I could ask more, his radio crackled and interrupted the conversation. A call came in. He apologized and headed back toward his cruiser. As he opened the driver's door, he paused. Then he looked back at me. "If you hear somebody asking to come inside," his expression turned deadly serious, "don't open the door." The cruiser disappeared down the driveway, leaving me standing alone. Again. That evening, I couldn't focus on anything. The deputy's warning kept replaying in my head. Around sunset, I decided to walk the property. Maybe I needed proof that all of this had a logical explanation. The fields were quiet. The barns were empty. Everything seemed normal, until I reached the oldest chicken coop near the northern boundary. The birds were huddled together in one corner, not moving, not making noise, just staring, every single one of them, toward the woods. A cold breeze drifted across the field. Something caught my eye, deep among the trees. Movement, slow, careful, a gray shape stepping between the trunks. I raised my phone. The figure stopped. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then it stepped behind a tree. Gone. Without thinking, I started walking toward the woods. One step, then another. The closer I got, the colder the air became. Soon I reached the first row of trees. The sunlight barely reached the ground here. Everything felt wrong. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind, just silence. Then I saw it. An old rusted cage hidden beneath tangled branches. Small, barely large enough for a person to crouch inside. My stomach turned. The metal looked ancient, but something about it seemed disturbingly familiar, as if it hadn't always been empty. Attached to one side was a weathered chain, and hanging from the chain, a faded photograph. I picked it up carefully. The image was damaged by age and rain, but one detail remained perfectly clear. The photograph showed the farmhouse, and standing on the front porch was a young man holding a camera, the exact same camera model I had brought with me to the farm. Then I noticed the date written across the bottom. June 14th, 1997. And beneath the date, someone had written 4 words. He never left the property. I stood frozen among the trees, staring at the photograph. The image was nearly 30 years old, yet the farmhouse looked exactly the same. The porch, the windows, even the old swing hanging from the front beam. Nothing had changed. But the man in the picture bothered me most. Not because of the camera, not because of the handwritten warning, because the longer I looked at him, the more familiar he seemed. I folded the photograph and shoved it into my pocket. Then I hurried back toward the house. The entire walk back, I felt watched. Not imagined, not paranoia. The unmistakable feeling that someone was moving somewhere behind me, matching my pace. Every time I turned around, there was nothing. Just trees, just shadows, just silence. By the time I reached the farmhouse, the sun was already setting. Dark clouds were gathering again. A storm was coming. Inside, I locked every door and checked every window. Then I called the property owner. When he answered, I immediately asked about the photograph. The line went quiet, too quiet. For several seconds, he didn't say anything. Finally, he spoke. "Where did you find that?" His voice sounded different, tense, careful. I told him about the cage in the woods. Another long silence followed. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. "Leave it where it was." "What?" "Put the photograph back." I laughed nervously. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." The owner sounded genuinely frightened. "I should have removed that years ago." "Removed what?" "The cage." I waited, but he refused to explain further. Instead, he changed the subject and repeatedly asked whether anyone had come to the house recently. I told him about the voices, the figure, the strange vehicle, the deputy's warning. When I finished speaking, he exhaled slowly. Then he said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "Whatever happens tonight," my stomach tightened, "don't answer anybody after midnight." The line ended. No explanation, no answers, just another warning. Outside, the storm finally arrived. Rain slammed against the farmhouse windows. Thunder rattled the old walls. At around 11:30 p.m., the power went out. The entire property vanished into darkness. Only my flashlight remained. I sat in the kitchen, listening to the storm, waiting, watching, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Then midnight arrived, and exactly at 12:03 a.m., somebody knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The dog immediately began growling. I remained silent. Another 3 knocks followed. Then a voice, a woman's voice, soft, shaking. "Please." My blood ran cold. It was the same voice from the intercom, the same voice I had heard upstairs. "Please let me in." The dog barked violently. I backed away from the door. The woman continued. "They followed me." Every word sounded rehearsed, almost identical to a script. Then another voice spoke behind her. A man, calm, cold. "Open the door." Lightning flashed outside. For a split second, I saw 2 figures standing on the porch through the frosted glass. A woman and a large man beside her, both completely still, neither moving, neither blinking. The next knock hit harder, then harder again. The old wooden door shook in its frame. A crack appeared near the deadbolt. The dog began whining, not barking anymore, whining, terrified. Then something unexpected happened. The farmhouse intercom suddenly activated. Static exploded through every speaker in the house. A man's voice emerged, louder than ever before, desperate, panicked. "Get away from the door." The voice echoed through every room. The pounding stopped instantly. Complete silence followed. Even the storm seemed to pause. I sat in the kitchen, listening to the storm, waiting, watching, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Then I approached a nearby window, carefully, very carefully, and looked toward the porch. The woman was gone. The large man was gone. But standing at the bottom of the porch steps was the gray figure from the woods, motionless, facing the house. And this time, it wasn't alone. At least 6 more gray figures were standing behind it in the rain, watching, waiting, as if they had finally found what they came for.
The gray figures remained in the rain until sunrise, not moving, not speaking, not reacting to the storm. Every few minutes, lightning illuminated the property, and each flash confirmed they were still there, standing silently beyond the porch, watching the farmhouse, watching me. I stayed awake the entire night with a flashlight in one hand and a shotgun I found locked in the owner's cabinet resting beside me. By morning, the figures were gone. The yard was empty. The grass showed no footprints, no tracks, nothing. It was as if the entire night had never happened. But the crack in the front door remained, proof that something had been there. Around noon, Officer Randall returned. The moment he saw my face, he knew something was wrong. I told him everything: the knocking, the voices, the figures, the warning through the intercom. For the first time since meeting him, he looked genuinely disturbed. Then he asked me to follow him. We drove several miles into town to a small records building behind a sheriff's office. Inside, he pulled out an old box filled with newspaper clippings. Most were yellowed with age, some dated back more than 40 years. One article immediately caught my attention: local college student missing from farm property. June 1997, the same year written on the photograph, the same year as the warning. Randall placed several more articles beside it. Another disappearance, then another, and another. Different years, different people, same property. Every case involved someone staying temporarily at the farmhouse: caretakers, seasonal workers, guests, visitors. Some vanished without explanation. Others left suddenly and refused to discuss what happened. One report stood out above all the others. A witness claimed to have seen gray people standing near the northern tree line shortly before one disappearance. The statement had been dismissed at the time. Now it felt horrifyingly relevant. I looked at Randall. What are these things? The deputy stared at the file. I honestly don't know. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he slid one final photograph across the table. The image had been taken in 2001. A group of search volunteers stood near the northern tree line. At first, it looked ordinary. Then I noticed something in the background. Between 2 trees, a gray silhouette, watching the camera, watching the people, exactly like the figure I had seen. My stomach twisted. Randall leaned back in his chair. We've never solved any of it. The room felt colder. What happened to the people who disappeared? His expression darkened. That's the problem. He tapped the photograph. We never found them. That evening, I returned to the farmhouse feeling worse than ever, because now I knew one thing. The property had a history, a very dark one, and whatever was happening wasn't new. It had been happening for decades. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, I noticed something waiting in my mailbox at the end of the driveway. A plain white envelope. No stamp, no address, no name. Just the envelope. Someone had delivered it by hand. Inside was a single photograph. A photograph taken the previous night. My heart nearly stopped. The picture showed the front porch of the farmhouse, the gray figures standing in the rain, the woman, the large man, everything. The photo had been taken from somewhere behind me, from inside the house, as if someone had been standing in the darkness watching me the entire time. On the back of the photograph, written in black marker, were 6 words: "You should have left sooner."
At that moment, I realized the nightmare at the farmhouse wasn't ending. It was only the beginning.
This is where the real horror begins. And trust me, what happens next, you won't forget. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe to Nightfall Horror 002, because something even more terrifying is coming.
I should have left after finding the photograph. Any sane person would have. But fear does strange things. Sometimes it makes you run. Other times it makes you stay because you become obsessed with understanding what's happening. For me, it was the second one. A week later, needing a break from the isolation of the farmhouse, I picked up a few extra shifts at a grocery store in a small town about 30 minutes away. The work was easy. The people were normal, or at least they seemed normal. For the first few days, the store felt like a refuge from everything happening at the farmhouse. Bright lights, background music, customers chatting about ordinary life. No gray figures, no mysterious voices, no strange photographs. Then Saturday arrived. The store was unusually busy that afternoon. Families filled the aisles, kids ran around with snacks. Nothing seemed out of place, until a woman entered with 3 young boys. The moment I saw her, something inside me tightened. I couldn't explain why. She looked exhausted, messy blonde hair, oversized hoodie, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite being indoors. One of the boys carried a small dog carrier. Another kept glancing toward the entrance as if expecting someone. The third never spoke at all. They wandered through the store for nearly 20 minutes. Then one of the managers quietly announced a theft alert over the staff radio. Immediately, everyone became attentive. The family split up. The boys moved toward different aisles. The woman headed toward the pharmacy section. Something felt rehearsed, like they had done this before. Minutes later, one of the boys rushed toward the exit, carrying the dog carrier. My manager intercepted him outside. The kid instantly began screaming, loud enough for everyone inside the store to hear. Customers stopped shopping. People turned. The woman exploded into a fit of rage. She stormed toward the front entrance, yelling accusations, claiming her child had been attacked, claiming the staff were harassing them. But the security footage told a different story. Inside the carrier wasn't a dog. It was stuffed with stolen merchandise, medicine, alcohol, chemical products, dozens of items. The entire scene became chaos. Eventually, the family fled before police arrived. Most employees laughed it off afterwards. Just another attempted theft, just another crazy customer. But while everyone else returned to work, I couldn't stop staring at the security monitor, because right before the family entered the store, the camera had captured something disturbing. Standing outside in the parking lot, watching the entrance, a gray figure, perfectly still, the same shape I had seen near the farmhouse, the same unnatural silhouette from the woods. My blood ran cold. I rewound the footage. The figure remained there, motionless, watching. Then, seconds before the family entered the building, it disappeared. Not walked away, not hidden, gone, as if it had never existed. I immediately checked the timestamp. Then I noticed something else, something even stranger. The figure appeared exactly at 10:30 a.m., the same time the farmhouse intercom activated every night, the same time the strange events usually began. For the first time, a terrifying possibility entered my mind. What if the farmhouse wasn't the source? What if whatever was happening had followed me? That night, I drove back to the property under a sky filled with storm clouds. And waiting on the farmhouse porch was another white envelope.
The envelope was already wet from the evening rain. It sat directly in front of the door. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sign that anyone had been there. Just the envelope, waiting. I picked it up with shaking hands and carried it inside. The dog immediately began growling, not at the envelope, at the front window. I pulled back the curtain. Nothing. Darkness. The yard was empty, yet the dog refused to stop staring outside. I opened the envelope. Inside was another photograph. This one had been taken inside the grocery store. My stomach dropped. The photo showed Register 3, my register. The photo had clearly been taken from the ceiling security camera, but there was one problem. The image wasn't from the store's system. Someone had printed it and written a message across the bottom. It knows you recognized it. I felt sick. The photograph slipped from my hands because standing behind me in the picture, barely visible in the reflection of a refrigerator door, was the gray figure watching me. The rest of the night passed without incident, or so I thought. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of static, the intercom again. I sat upright in bed. The house was completely dark. The static continued. Then a voice whispered through the speaker. Not the male voice, not the female voice, a completely different voice. A child, soft, terrified. Please, don't let them find me. The transmission ended. Silence returned. I grabbed a flashlight and checked every room. Nothing, nobody, no explanation. The next morning, I drove back to town and asked Officer Randall to meet me. When I showed him the new photograph, his face lost all color. Then he said something unexpected. There was a kid. What kid? He looked toward the window. A missing child case. My chest tightened. Randall opened an old file cabinet and removed a folder. The case was from 2004. A 12-year-old boy named Tyler Mason vanished without a trace. Last seen riding his bicycle near the same road that led to the farmhouse. Search teams spent weeks looking for him. They never found anything, not even the bike. Then Randall handed me a photograph. The boy stared back from the image. Freckles, brown hair, blue baseball cap. Normal kid, but something made my stomach turn. Written on the back of the photograph were 6 words. He said they stood in gray. I looked up. What does that mean? Randall slowly exhaled. Tyler's friend reported something strange before he disappeared. What? The deputy hesitated, then answered. He said Tyler kept talking about gray people in the woods. The room fell silent. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Randall leaned forward. The kid also claimed they weren't alone. My pulse quickened. What else was there? The deputy opened another page from the file. A witness statement. Short. Only 1 sentence. I read it twice, then a third time, because I couldn't believe what it said. Tyler said the gray people always followed a woman who cried at doors and a large man who never blinked. The exact pair I'd seen on the porch. The same woman, the same man. My hands started shaking because those descriptions matched perfectly, and the report was over 20 years old. That evening, while driving back to the farmhouse, rain began falling again. The road was empty. The woods stretched endlessly beside me. Then my headlights illuminated something ahead. A bicycle, old, rusted, lying beside the road, half buried in weeds. I slammed on the brakes. The bike looked like it had been sitting there for years, yet something about it felt wrong, almost placed, almost deliberate. Then I noticed something hanging from the handlebars, a blue baseball cap, weathered by time, faded, but still recognizable. Tyler Mason's cap. And standing 20 yards beyond it, at the edge of the trees, was the gray figure, holding the 3rd white envelope.
The gray figure didn't move. Neither did I.
Rain hammered against my windshield as we stared at each other across the roadside ditch. The envelope hung from its hand, perfectly still. Then my headlights flickered, just once, for less than a second. When the lights stabilized again, the figure was gone. The envelope remained, lying beside Tyler's bicycle. My instincts screamed at me to leave, drive away, forget everything. Instead, I stepped out into the rain. The air felt strangely cold, not normal cold, the kind of cold that seems to come from inside your bones. I approached the envelope carefully. The paper was completely dry despite the storm. I picked it up. Inside was a folded map, a hand-drawn map. At first, it looked like a rough sketch of the farm property. Then I noticed markings extending beyond the northern woods, far beyond anything shown on official maps. There was a symbol circled deep inside the forest, an X, and beneath it, someone had written, "Find where they wait." My stomach tightened because attached to the map was another photograph. This one showed a location I recognized instantly. The beach, Ardamine Beach, Ireland. I stared at it in confusion. Why would a photograph from Ireland be connected to a Pennsylvania farm? Then I looked closer. Near the rocky shoreline stood a gray silhouette. The same shape, the same unnatural outline, the same impossible figure. Suddenly, the story became much bigger than a single farmhouse, much bigger than Pennsylvania. Whatever these things were, they weren't tied to one location. That night, I spread the map across my kitchen table. The dog refused to come near it. Every time I moved the paper, he backed away and growled. Around midnight, Officer Randall called. His voice sounded urgent. "Listen carefully." "What happened?" "We found something." My heart began racing. "What?" "The grocery store." I froze. "What about it?" "The security footage." Randall paused. "You need to see this yourself." 20 minutes later, I was sitting inside the sheriff's office. The security video played on a monitor. The timestamp showed the exact moment before the family entered the store. The gray figure appeared in the parking lot, exactly as before. But this time, they had enhanced the footage. My blood turned to ice, because the figure wasn't alone. Standing beside it were several others, at least 7, barely visible, hidden in shadows, watching the entrance, watching the people, watching me. Then the video zoomed in further, and for the first time, one of the figures became clear enough to distinguish a face. I wish it hadn't, because the face wasn't gray, it wasn't human, it was smooth, faceless, like wet clay shaped into the rough outline of a person. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing, just a blank surface. Several officers in the room looked uncomfortable. One deputy actually left. Nobody wanted to keep watching. Then the footage reached its final frame. The screen froze. The room became silent. Because one of the faceless faces was no longer looking toward the store. It was looking directly at the camera. And beneath the camera's timestamp appeared something impossible. Words. Not added digitally, not edited. They simply appeared on the image itself. A message, as if someone had written it inside the video. "We found the last one." Nobody in the room spoke, because every person there understood the same thing. The message wasn't meant for the police.
It wasn't meant for the store. It was meant for me. And somewhere beyond the northern woods, something was getting closer.
Nobody slept that night. Not me, not Officer Randall, not the deputies who had watched the footage. The image stayed burned into my mind. We found the last one. The question that haunted me wasn't what the message meant. It was why they considered me the last one. The next morning, Randall called before sunrise. His voice was strained. "You need to come to the station." What happened? We found another file. By the time I arrived, several old case boxes were spread across a conference table. Some were covered in dust. Others looked like they hadn't been opened in decades. Randall pointed toward a stack of reports. Every missing person connected to the farm. I immediately noticed a pattern. The disappearances occurred years apart: 1997, 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001. Different victims, different circumstances, yet every file contains similar details: strange visitors, knocking at doors, unexplained voices, gray figures, and one final event before each disappearance: a photograph. My chest tightened. Every victim received photographs before they vanished, exactly like I had. Then, Randall handed me something that made my blood run cold: a photograph of me. I stared at it, speechless. The picture showed me standing beside the mailbox at the farmhouse, holding one of the white envelopes. The image had been taken only 3 days earlier. Nobody should have had access to it. Nobody should have been there. Yet somehow, someone had been watching. The back of the photograph contained a date: July 17th, 2024, 3 weeks into the future. I looked up. "What is this?" Randall didn't answer immediately, because he looked just as disturbed. Then he slid another photograph across the table. This one showed the farmhouse porch. The date on the back was from 2001, another future date. The victim disappeared exactly on that day. A third photograph, another future date, another victim, another disappearance. The realization hit me all at once. The dates weren't predictions, they were countdowns, and my date was approaching. That afternoon, we decided to investigate the location marked on the map from the envelope, the X hidden beyond the northern woods. A search team assembled: 4 deputies, 2 local volunteers, Randall, and me. The hike took nearly 2 hours. The deeper we went, the stranger the forest became. Birds vanished, no insects, no animal sounds, only silence. Then we found it, an enormous clearing hidden in the middle of the woods. Nobody spoke, because every person there immediately understood something was wrong. Hundreds of old photographs were hanging from trees, hundreds swinging gently in the wind. Every photograph showed a different person, different decades, different years, different faces. Some were children, some were adults, some were elderly. All of them were staring directly at the camera, as if posing unwillingly. The search team spread out, carefully examining the clearing. Then one deputy shouted, his voice cracked with fear. We ran toward him. Near the center of the clearing stood a massive stone structure hidden beneath vines. It wasn't natural. It looked ancient, older than anything in the county. Carved into the stone were symbols nobody recognized, but one detail froze me in place. There was a photograph attached to the center, a brand new photograph, taken recently. The image showed me sleeping inside the farmhouse, and beneath it were 4 words: "Almost time to return." At that exact moment, something moved among the trees surrounding the clearing. Then another and another. Gray figures, dozens of them, emerging silently from the woods, watching us, waiting, as if we just stepped into a place where we never supposed to go.
The clearing fell silent. Not the normal kind of silence. The kind that presses against your ears until your heartbeat becomes the loudest sound in the world.
Dozens of gray figures stood among the trees, motionless, watching. Nobody on the search team spoke. Nobody moved. Then one of the volunteers whispered, "What are they?" Before anyone could answer, a branch snapped somewhere behind us. Every flashlight swung toward the sound. Nothing. Then another snap, closer. The gray figures remained completely still, almost like they weren't the source of the danger, almost like they were watching something else, something approaching. Officer Randall immediately ordered everyone back toward the trail. Slowly, carefully, nobody argued. The deeper we moved away from the stone structure, the more uneasy the figures seemed. Several shifted slightly, not walking, not following, just turning their featureless heads, tracking our movement. Then one of the deputies stopped. His flashlight pointed toward the stone. "What is that?" I turned. My stomach dropped. The photographs hanging throughout the clearing had changed. Moments earlier, every image showed different people. Now they all displayed the exact same picture. The farmhouse. Every photograph, every single one. The farmhouse at night, with a light glowing from the upstairs window. My room. The room where I slept. A cold wave passed through my body. Then all the photographs began swaying violently. There was no wind, yet hundreds of photographs swung back and forth at once. The sound echoed through the clearing like whispers. And then a voice, not from the woods, not from the figures, from the stone itself. A deep vibration, almost a human voice, almost. The sound seemed to come from inside the earth. One sentence repeated over and over. "Bring him back." The search team broke. Fear finally overwhelmed everyone. People started running. Randall grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the trail. Branches whipped against our faces as we sprinted through the forest. Behind us, the whispering continued, growing louder, closer. By the time we reached the edge of the woods, darkness had fallen. Everyone was exhausted, shaken, terrified, but alive, at least for the moment. Back at the station, nobody could explain what we had witnessed. The official report described it as mass panic, stress, environmental confusion, anything except the truth, because the truth sounded impossible. That night, I returned to the farmhouse one final time, not because I wanted to, because every clue pointed back there, every photograph, every disappearance, every warning, everything started at the house, and somehow everything would end there too. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The dog was gone. His food bowl sat untouched. The back door stood open. The house felt empty, abandoned. I searched every room. No sign of him, no sign of anyone. Then I noticed something on the kitchen table. Another envelope. The last envelope. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a photograph. A beach, dark rocks, gray ocean. I immediately recognized it. Artemine Beach, Ireland. The same place from the earlier photograph. But this image contained something new. Standing on the rocks was a young woman holding a phone. Behind her stood a gray shape. And behind the gray shape, a familiar face. My face. The same impossible image from Aoife's nightmare. The same warning. The same connection. Beneath the photograph were handwritten coordinates and a single sentence. They started here. For the first time, I understood. The farmhouse was never the beginning. It was only one stop along a much larger path. A path that stretched across oceans, across decades. And whatever waited at Artemine Beach had been calling people there for generations. My nightmare in Pennsylvania was over. But the real story
was only beginning. I almost stopped the video here, because what appears next isn't human. Nahid Hassan kept saying one thing. It's standing behind me. If you're still watching, subscribe to Nightfall 002.
3 weeks later, I landed in Ireland. Every instinct told me this was a terrible idea, but after everything I'd seen, the farmhouse, the photographs, the clearing in the woods, I couldn't walk away. Too many people had disappeared, too many questions remained unanswered, and every road seemed to lead back to one place, Ardamine Beach. The drive from Dublin felt longer than it was. Rain drifted across the windshield in thin gray sheets. The coastline appeared gradually through the fog, cold, empty, ancient. By the time I arrived, evening was settling over the sea. The beach looked ordinary at first. Families walking dogs, teenagers gathered near the rocks, tourists taking photographs of the harbor. Nothing about it suggested decades of disappearances and impossible events. Yet the moment I stepped onto the sand, a familiar feeling returned. That sensation of being watched. The same feeling I had known at the farmhouse. The same feeling from the woods. The same feeling from the clearing. Something here recognized me. I checked into a small mobile park overlooking the shoreline. The owner was friendly enough until I mentioned why I was visiting. Then his smile disappeared. "You should leave before dark." The words sounded rehearsed, as if he had said them before. I asked why. The man hesitated, then pointed toward the sea. "People see things out there." "What kind of things?" His eyes shifted away. "Depends who's looking." That answer stayed with me. Later that night, I walked toward the rocky path near the harbor. The tide was low. The exposed rocks stretched into the darkness like broken teeth. Wind whipped across the shoreline. The sea remained strangely calm. Then I noticed someone standing near the rocks. A young woman, late 20s, dark jacket, long blonde hair, holding a phone. For a moment, my pulse stopped. She looked exactly like the woman from the photograph, the same woman standing on the rocks with the gray shape behind her. I approached carefully. Before I could speak, she turned, and her face went pale. "You're him!" The words hit me like a punch. "What?" She stared at me, terrified. "You're the man from my dream." Cold spread through my chest. The dream. Aife's dream. The photograph. The farmhouse. Everything suddenly collided. The woman introduced herself as Aife, the same Aife from the original incident years earlier, the same person who had witnessed the gray figure on the beach. For several minutes, neither of us knew what to say. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. The original photograph, the one she had taken years ago. The gray shape still stood near the rocks, featureless, watching. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Hidden farther back in the image, barely visible through the darkness, was another figure. A man standing beside the gray shape. The image was blurry, distorted, but I immediately recognized him. The large man from the farmhouse porch, the man who never blinked. The man who appeared in witness reports dating back decades. Aife looked at me nervously. "I've never shown this to anyone." The wind howled across the shoreline. Neither of us noticed the gray silhouette standing on the distant rocks, watching us from the darkness, waiting.
The gray silhouette remained on the rocks. Neither Aoife nor I noticed it at first. We were too focused on the photograph.
too focused on the impossible connection between Ireland and Pennsylvania. The same figures, the same faces, the same pattern, separated by an ocean, yet somehow linked. Aoife finally broke the silence. "There's something I never told anyone." The wind carried her words away almost as soon as she spoke them. "What?" She looked toward the sea. "The night I took that picture, I wasn't the only one who saw it." I waited. "My younger cousin saw it too." "What happened to him?" Her face darkened. "He disappeared 6 months later." The words landed heavily. Another disappearance, another victim, another connection. Aoife explained that her cousin, Cian, became obsessed after that night. He claimed the gray shape appeared in reflections, windows, mirrors, phone screens. He started drawing the same symbol repeatedly, a strange circular mark with lines branching outward, the exact symbol I had seen carved into the stone structure in Pennsylvania. My stomach tightened. Before I could respond, a voice interrupted us. "You're asking questions that people shouldn't ask." Both of us turned. An elderly man stood several yards away near the harbor wall. I hadn't heard him approach, neither had Aoife. The old fisherman wore a weathered fishing coat and carried a lantern. His face looked exhausted, as though he'd spent years carrying a burden he couldn't put down. Without introducing himself, he looked directly at me. "You came from America." It wasn't a question. I nodded. The old man sighed. Then he said something that froze me in place. "They've been waiting for you." The exact phrase from the photographs, the exact warning. Aoife visibly shivered. The old fisherman motioned for us to follow him. Against my better judgment, we did. He led us through narrow streets toward a small cottage overlooking the harbor. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, just like the clearing in Pennsylvania. Different years, different people, different countries. Ireland, America, Scotland, Canada, Australia. Every photo contained one common detail, a gray figure somewhere in the background, watching, waiting. The old man pointed toward the oldest photograph. The image was faded almost beyond recognition. The date beneath it read 1874. My pulse quickened. The photo showed Ardamine Beach, and standing among a group of fishermen was a gray figure, the same one, unchanged, exactly the same, over 150 years earlier. "That's impossible," I whispered. The fisherman nodded slowly. "That's what everyone says." Then he revealed something even worse. For over a century, people connected to these sightings had vanished, not immediately, sometimes years later, sometimes decades, but eventually they disappeared. Always after receiving warnings, always after photographs, always after being noticed. Aoife looked terrified. "So what are they?" The old man remained silent for several moments, then answered quietly, "They're not hunting people." The room suddenly felt colder. "What do you mean?" I asked. His eyes settled on me. "They're looking for someone." Every instinct told me I wouldn't like the next answer. The fisherman pointed toward a photograph hanging near the fireplace. The image had been taken recently, only weeks earlier. My breath caught, because the photograph showed me standing outside the Pennsylvania farmhouse, and written beneath it were 4 words, "The last returning witness." Outside, thunder rolled across the Irish coastline, and somewhere beyond the harbor rocks, something screamed.
Not human, not animal, something far older, something that had finally realized I was here.
The scream echoed across the harbor. Every window in the cottage rattled. Aoife jumped to her feet. The old fisherman didn't. That frightened me more than the scream itself. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, as if he had heard that sound many times before. Then he quietly said, "They know where you are now." A cold silence settled over the room. Outside, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the glass, while distant waves crashed against the rocks below. I stared at the photograph labeled "The Last Returning Witness." The question burning in my mind finally escaped. Who am I supposed to be returning from? The fisherman looked at me for a long time. Then he walked toward an old wooden cabinet and removed a small metal box. The lock had rusted away decades earlier. Inside were newspaper clippings, handwritten journals, and several black and white photographs. One photograph immediately caught my attention. It showed a young man standing at Ardamine Beach in 1983. At first glance, he looked like a stranger. Then my stomach dropped. He looked exactly like me. Not similar, not familiar, exactly. Same eyes, same jawline, same height, even the same scar above the eyebrow that I'd gotten as a child. Aoife noticed it too. She turned pale. "That's impossible." I couldn't disagree, because it was impossible. The date was more than 40 years old, yet the man in the picture was undeniably me. The fisherman carefully placed another photograph beside it. This one dated from 1949. Again, the same face. Then another from 1911. Same face, same eyes, same expression. Generation after generation, the same person appearing again and again. I felt dizzy. This has to be fake. The fisherman shook his head. No. Then explain it. He slowly opened one of the journals. The pages were fragile with age. Near the center was a handwritten entry from 1912. The writing described a traveler who arrived from America after seeing gray figures. The man stayed in Ardamine for 3 weeks before vanishing. Before disappearing, he was reported to say one thing repeatedly: "I've done this before." The room felt smaller, harder to breathe in, because deep down, something inside me already knew what the fisherman was about to say. "You think that was me?" The old man looked genuinely sad. "No." My stomach tightened. "Then what?" His answer was worse. "I think all of them were." A violent crash suddenly shook the cottage. Everyone jumped. Something had struck the front door hard. Another impact followed, then another. The wood groaned. Aoife grabbed her phone. I rushed toward the nearest window and froze. Figures. Gray figures standing in the rain outside. Not one, not two, dozens. Their featureless faces pointed towards the cottage, watching, waiting, exactly as they had outside the farmhouse. Then a familiar shape emerged between them. A woman, pale, thin, mascara streaked down her cheeks. The same woman who had appeared on the farmhouse porch. The same woman described in witness statements for decades. She stepped toward the door and softly knocked 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. The fisherman immediately extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Outside,
The woman's voice drifted through the storm. "Please let me in." The exact same words, the exact same script. Then another voice followed, deep, cold, emotionless, a man's voice. "Open the door." The large man had arrived, and somehow he sounded closer than ever before.
Nobody answered the door. The fisherman stood perfectly still in the darkness. Aoife clutched my arm so tightly it hurt. Outside, the knocking continued. Slow, patient, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. The woman never changed her tone, never sounded angry, never sounded frustrated. She simply repeated the same plea over and over. "Please let me in." The large man remained silent, at least at first. Then, after several minutes, he spoke. "You've done this before." The words hit me like ice water. My heart stopped because he wasn't speaking to the fisherman. He wasn't speaking to Aoife. He was speaking directly to me. The old fisherman slowly turned toward me. Even in the darkness, I could see the fear in his eyes. They remember. What do they remember? Before he could answer, every window in the cottage exploded inward. Glass scattered across the floor. Aoife screamed. Wind and rain poured into the room. Yet nothing entered. The gray figures remained outside, motionless, watching, almost like they couldn't cross some invisible boundary. Then something happened. A memory, not a thought, not imagination, a memory. Suddenly, images flooded my mind. The farmhouse, but not the way I remembered it. Older, much older. No electricity, no paved roads, horse-drawn wagons, oil lanterns, people wearing clothing from another century. I saw myself standing on the porch, not as I am now, as someone else, someone from long ago. The same face, the same eyes, a different life. Then another memory struck. Ardamine Beach, a violent storm, a shipwreck, bodies washing ashore, gray figures standing among the dead, watching, waiting. Again I was there, again with the same face, the same impossible face. More memories followed. 1911, 1912, 1913, 1914. Every missing person, every photograph, every disappearance. The memories weren't random, they were connected, fragments of the same story, repeating again and again. The fisherman grabbed my shoulders. "You see it now, don't you?" I could barely speak. They weren't following the victims. The old man nodded. "No." My voice shook. They were following me. Outside, the woman stopped knocking. For the first time, complete silence fell over the storm. The gray figures slowly stepped aside, creating a path toward the harbor, toward the rocks, toward the sea. Then the large man stepped forward, and for the first time in decades, he removed his sunglasses. Aoife gasped. The fisherman looked away. I couldn't, because behind the glasses were no eyes, only darkness, an endless black void. The man pointed toward the shoreline, then spoke a single sentence. "The door is open again." At that exact moment, a distant glow appeared over the ocean, far beyond the harbor, a circle of pale gray light hovering over the water. The same symbol from the stone structure, the same symbol from the journals, the same symbol drawn by missing children.
After more than a century, whatever had started all of this was finally returning, and somehow it wanted me there.
The pale circle hovered above the ocean, silent, motionless, yet every person on the shoreline could feel it. The fishermen in the harbor had stopped moving. Lights inside nearby homes flickered. Dogs barked endlessly across the village. Even the waves seemed wrong. Instead of crashing toward the shore, they appeared to pull away from it, as if the sea itself was retreating. The gray figures began walking, not toward the village, not toward the cottage, toward the glowing circle. One by one, silent as shadows. The woman stepped forward first, then the large man, then the dozens of featureless figures behind them. None of them looked back. It felt less like a march and more like a homecoming. Afa stood beside me, trembling. The fisherman remained silent. He already knew what was coming. I could see it in his eyes. The memories flooding my mind became stronger, no longer fragments, entire lifetimes, entire centuries. I finally understood the truth. The photographs, the disappearances, the warnings, the gray figures, the farmhouse, the beach, they were all connected by one impossible event. Every generation, someone witnessed the opening. Every generation, one person remembered. Not consciously, not completely, but enough to be found again, enough to be called back. The reason my face appeared throughout history wasn't reincarnation. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a ghost. It was something stranger. Every witness became part of the story, and when the opening returned, the memory returned with them. The gray figures weren't hunters. They were guardians, watchers. Their task wasn't to take people. Their task was to make sure the wrong person never crossed through the opening. The real danger had always been on the other side. The fisherman finally spoke, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Now you know why they follow." I nodded, because I did. The woman, the large man, the gray figures, they weren't trying to enter houses. They were testing people, looking for the one who remembered, looking for the witness, the last witness, me. The glowing circle over the ocean expanded. The light became almost blinding. For a moment, I saw shapes moving inside it, massive shapes, impossible shapes, things that didn't belong in any world I understood. Afa grabbed my arm. "Don't go." I looked at her, then toward the sea, then back to the gray figures. For the first time, they weren't watching me. They were waiting, giving me a choice, the same choice that had apparently existed for generations. Cross the threshold or walk away. I took a single step toward the shoreline. The wind instantly intensified. The circle pulsed. The darkness inside seemed to awaken. Then I remembered every photograph, every missing person, every warning, every life destroyed by curiosity. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I made the decision none of them had made. I turned around and walked away. The moment I did, the circle collapsed. The light vanished. The ocean roared back to life. The storm broke apart, and every gray figure disappeared. Gone, as if none of them had ever existed. I left Ireland 2 days later. The farmhouse was eventually sold. The stone structure in Pennsylvania was never found again. Officer Randall retired shortly afterward. Afa still lives near the coast, though she never visits the rocks at night. As for me, I still receive photographs sometimes. No return address, no explanation. Usually just landscapes, forests, roads, empty beaches. But every once in a while, hidden somewhere in the background, I see a familiar gray silhouette, watching, waiting, making sure the door stays closed.
And every time I find one of those photographs, I remember the final words the fisherman said before I left Artemine. Some mysteries survive because someone chooses not to solve them. To this day, I believe he was right, because somewhere beyond our world, something is still waiting for another witness.
This video is over, but the story isn't, because Nahid Hassan was never found. And if your phone turns on by itself tonight, just know you've been chosen. Subscribe to Nightfall Horrors 002, because you're not safe anymore.